You good to get started, Catherine?
Yeah. Yep.
Great. All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here this morning, or depending on where you are. Actually, it will be morning for everyone in the United States. That was a little bit of a brain fart to start off. Thank you all for being here this morning. My name's Jack. I work with the General Alumni Association. I want to mention that we are recording this coffee chat, so if you have to step out at any minute, we will send out a link with the recording. Also, have the understanding of, job searching and, updating your resume is a personal thing. So if you want to remain private, I, recommend that you take this time, log out of the call, and maybe log in with your middle name or an anonymous name. So basically the format today is going to be pretty informal. We are going to kind of start up top. Catherine and Marcy will kind of just a couple best practices on updating your resume. And then we're really just going to open up the floor to discussion. We'll start, I think we're going to try and just do it in chat today because we have quite a number of people who have registered for this call, and we want to kind of minimize the technical hiccups wherever possible. So feel free to type your questions into the chat as we go. I'm going to be looking at them, and then I will be kind of moderating and posing questions to Catherine as we go. With that said, I'm very excited to introduce Katherine Tuttle and Marcy Leemore. Marcy, are you on?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, there you are. I will also say Marcy has a 1.5-year-old at home, so she's juggling a lot of things right now. Katherine is a career consultant with the General Alumni Association, and over the past 12 years has been working one-on-one with MBA grads, mid-level career professionals, executives. She has extensive experience working with resumes, cover letters, and coaching, and is the owner of Forward Thinking Resumes. We are excited to have Katherine working with us to provide career support for our alumni. Marcy is the Director of Enrichment Programs for the General Alumni Association, is a 99 grad, and has extensive experience within the nonprofit field. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass it over to Katherine and Marcy.
Thanks so much, Jack. And I would just ask everybody if you could mute, just make sure that your line is muted. There's been a lot of background noise here, and so if we can all just mute our lines, that would be fantastic. Is there anyone to mute people?
Yeah, I'm going to bring it now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So thank you all for joining. I'm excited to be here. It's, we were doing these coffee chats in person, and that was nice, but it's wonderful to be able to continue this in this environment that we are in right now and moving things virtual. So I'm glad you're all here. It was a nice excuse to put makeup on and real clothes and have a conversation with adults, because I am homeschooling a child while working, which I'm sure many of you are. It is an interesting time we're living in. And I will say that we have seen kind of an uptick in interest from alumni in terms of using this time to think about what they want to do when this is all over, right? And I think some people have realized in this situation that things are really good at work, and they're finding some flexibility and thinking things will continue. And some people are thinking, long term, this isn't going to work for me, so I need to think about positioning myself, for a new opportunity moving forward. I will say we have also, when I say we, I talked to a number of recruiters trying to get some to join the call. It has picked back up for them. So we are starting to see hiring again. I'm seeing people move all the way through the process and get offers and start new roles virtually. So I think this is a good time if you're thinking of making a move to start updating your resume and getting your job search strategy together. So I reviewed the questions that everybody sent in advance, and so I want to kind of start with an overview in terms of kind of formatting content, and we had a number of questions around applicant tracking systems and how those elements have come together when you're creating a resume that hopefully can get through that scan. So doing a little bit of research for this morning, I found some interesting statistics that have changed over time. But one that stuck out to me, and it made sense because when I talk to alumni, they are telling me, I'm applying for hundreds of jobs and I'm not hearing back. I'm just nothing. It's crickets, and I get a standard, thank you for applying, we found somebody else. That is likely because 75% of resumes are never seen by a human. And that is because they have to make it through this applicant tracking system, or an ATS. So you'll hear a lot about this if you're Googling resumes and all that stuff. So what that is a software that initially was used by very large companies that get a very high volume of applications to scan through and try to select candidates based on keywords matching within the job description to the resume. Now, almost 95% of companies use these systems. So they are used pretty much across the board. UNC uses one when they're hiring. Many companies. I will say, Marcy, coming from nonprofit, they often do not, right? This often just email a resume, and that's wonderful. That's nice to know that somebody may actually be looking at it. But outside of that, it's really important that we write a resume with these systems in mind, especially if you do not have a contact within the organization who can flag your application. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're doing that. First thing is that from a formatting perspective, it needs to be very simple. These systems do not like charts or graphs. That information will get jumbled when it's being scanned. Anything within a header or a footer is not going to likely get through. So I would put your name and your contact information. At this point these days, I don't need your address. I just need, your email and your phone number. But that should not be in a header. That should be just in the main document. And the other piece to keep in mind is a simple format, Word doc. And then if you can upload a PDF, if that's an option, that's great, because that often preserves the formatting the way you have it. But sometimes PDFs aren't an option, in which case you would want a Word doc to submit. And then even more importantly than that, or I guess equally as important to that, is that we need to maximize the keywords within your resume to align with these jobs. That means that you will likely have to tailor every resume to a specific application, right? A specific opportunity that you're applying for, which I know is frustrating and you don't want to hear that. But it is what it is, and we don't have a contact. So the way to do that starting out, and hopefully to minimize kind of the number of things you have to change with every application, if you have a sense of the type of position you are looking for, I would go to LinkedIn or Indeed, and I would find 3 to 5 job descriptions that you can pull, right? And I would look at those, and a program like Wordle would be great. If you can kind of dump that text into Wordle, it will actually kind of pull out the terms that are repeating and show you those keywords. But what we want to do is look at maximizing those within the resume, right? So those words and phrases that are repeating need to be in multiple areas of your resume. So an easy way to do that starting out is to add a professional summary at the top or core competencies. That can be a few sentences, that can be bullet points, but it's a way to kind of lead with these key terms that the employer is going to be scanning for, or the ATS is going to be scanning for. And then from there, we want to reiterate those within the body of the resume. So in your bullets that you are adding under your experience. In terms of the cover letter, I get a lot of questions about that too. Like, are they scanning the cover letter? Are they scanning the resume? Are they scanning both? That unfortunately depends on the particular company and their particular system and how it is set up. So sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And in general, with cover letters, I think people sometimes rely on them too much to explain or to, get those keywords in, because we don't know if it's getting scanned and or if it's getting read, honestly. There's no science to that. So, certainly reiterating those key terms and experiences in a cover letter in case they're scanning both, but I would say, really relying heavily on the resume itself. So in terms of bullets, and we got some questions around this too, in terms of, I feel like I'm just listing my job description within the body of the resume. That really isn't necessary. For the most part, we understand what is associated with certain jobs we're hiring for. What we want to see is results. We want to see what you've done and how that has made a positive impact on the organization. So I need less of, I'm responsible for yada, 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 and more, I managed this project that was able to, reduce overall cost by 20% and increase revenue by $20 million or whatever. And I get that makes a lot of people nervous because not everybody's in finance and not everybody is in areas where we can necessarily quantify everything, right? So in those cases, and we got a question about this in advance, in those cases, I want you to focus on the why. Why were you doing that? What was that supposed to do, right? And sometimes we don't know what the result is because we left or the project maybe didn't go all the way through. But why were you doing that? What was the goal of that action, right? So the goal was perhaps to increase employee engagement, but you can't necessarily quantify that, but that's still, a positive value to the organization, right? So why are you doing that? What was the goal of that effort? So I think overall, that is a quick summary of what we're thinking about. There's some great examples on the website. Jack, yes. You want to pull up the one of the let's see, yes, not the recent grad one, but that one, yeah. So this would be an example. That section at the top, is where we can put some key terms in, right? Those are based on the specific role. And then that is a fairly simple Word doc. And then from there, you are listing your experience in reverse chronological order, your education, and then any community involvement that you have, which employers certainly do value. It speaks to kind of what's important to you and also your network in certain certain cases where that can be important. And then if you pull up the other one, Jack, with the career highlights, yeah, that one. This is a way, and we got this question in advance, so I'm going to talk through it at a high level and then certainly open it up to questions. This is a way to pull up more relevant information that may be further down in the resume, right? So let's say that you want to go back to doing a role that you had maybe 5 years ago. Maybe the job title you have now doesn't represent what you want to do. So by pulling these experiences up that are directly related to that job description, it helps frame things for the employer and show them that you've thought about what is important in your background that aligns with what they're looking for. This is also great for people who have a gap. So the first thing I see isn't that you have been out of work for 5 years, 10 years, for whatever reason. I will say gaps are not the big red flag that they used to be. Most recruiters can overlook that. But it's the world we live in. But still, pulling up, the things that we want them to see first. I also like this version for people who may have been at a company for a very long time, right? So if we were to kind of do this with just the standard, professional experience, and you've been at one place, we can certainly break up the roles like we have here, the different roles that you've had within the organization. But, ultimately, sometimes we end up with way too much content in that section. And so what we want to do is pull some things out and break up the page a little bit. And again, frame this to the experience you're looking for. Because that initial scan, if it gets through the ATS and gets to a human, that initial scan on average is 6 seconds. It's just looking for keywords. It's looking for the keywords and kind of job titles and scanning through to check the box on education and all that stuff. So we really have to make sure that top half of the page makes them want to look further.
Great.
Sorry,
go ahead, Katherine. So I will say someone did ask if you can download these examples. I'm actually just going to click over. We have this resource article on the website, Top 10 Rules to Resume Writing, which Katherine wrote for us. And at the bottom of this page, you'll see those examples. I will also send them out in a follow-up email to this call. Looks like Marcy dropped that in there. Really appreciate that, Marcy. Great. You want me to open it up to some of these questions that we got from the chat? Does that sound good?
Yeah, I've been talking long enough. That works.
This was a question from Andy. Does tailoring the resume to job opening eliminate the need for a cover letter?
Hi, Andy. Good to see you. I would say no. If a cover letter is optional, I would always err on the side of submitting one, just to show that you're taking the time and effort. I will say, while there is no, scientific kind of formula for whether or not somebody actually reads a resume, when I talk to recruiters and hiring managers, or the cover letter rather, some of them do, some of them don't, some of them read it first, some of them read them second. All of them say they want to see that you took the time to do it. Ultimately, in this day and age where you can set up and, on job boards to just shoot your resume out to, any opening that matches, the job title, they want to see that this is more, you put more thought into it than that.
Marcy, as you're kind of, from your experience, being a hiring manager in nonprofits, do you have anything kind of that you look for in a cover letter, or anything to add to Katherine?
I would say, first of all, can you hear me okay? Somebody
Yes.
nod. That's perfect. I would say, and this is a follow-up to Andy and one of the questions in advance, you should always write a cover letter, and you should always use it as an example to tell your story and to stand out beyond the hard skills, whether that's you really feel compelled to talk about the gaps in employment for whatever reason. To Katherine's point, it's not always an issue, but if you feel compelled to share a little something about it, a sentence that says, you know, while I was caring for my children as they were growing up or whatever it is, that's a perfect opportunity to do that. To Katherine's point, I spend about 10 seconds per resume. I read resumes first. I go back to cover letters when I'm down to who I'm actually going to interview. So I make a yes-no pile really quickly, or a yes-no-maybe pile, and then cover letters are the thing that helps, for me, decide who I'm actually going to spend time interviewing. So if you want to do those quick resume drops because it's easy, I am not going to say don't do that, but I know job searching is a full-time job in of itself. And so what I always encourage people to do is spend more time on your research and your networking so that you're actually applying to fewer jobs, so that what you're applying to are things you really love and things you really want to be hired for, so that you can write thoughtful cover letters and you are not upset that you're customizing your resume yet again, because you're actually excited about the opportunity, which will come through in every touch point that you have with that employer.
Fantastic point. Thank you.
I got a couple questions here I'm going to kind of merge together a little bit. Keith and Rachel are kind of asking about the experience of putting education on your resume, how important that is now, and how Rachel specifically asks, multi-year full-time graduate degrees appear as gaps on your resume. So do you have any advice on how to frame those experiences? So I guess that's two questions. Should you still list education on your resume? And then how do you kind of frame those longer degrees?
Definitely want to list education. That is going to be a box that most employers are going to check. I get a lot of questions around, I don't have a degree in marketing. My degree is in political science, or, I don't have, a degree in this, and I don't know if that makes me, a quality candidate. In general, in the world we live in, they're just checking the box that you have a degree. I know more people with political science degrees not in politics than are, right? And so, yes, I think, but yeah, it is a box we need to check. And obviously, with UNC, very strong brand, well-respected institution, want to have that on there. It should not be first. If you have work experience as a recent grad, that is, top center, because that's what we're selling, right? We're selling the brand, and have less experience. Once you've been out and have a few years of experience, that education moves to the end of your resume.
Great.
And in terms of, gaps due to education, again, I think that the main thing is that we want, when they're looking at this 6 to 10 second review, as Marcy said, we want the most relevant information up front, right? And so that can either be, if you have gaps at certain times, you could have a relevant experience section and then additional experience. But ultimately that's explainable. And when people look at it, when they start looking at job titles and dates, they're going to realize that you were in graduate school at different points. But again, I wouldn't overanalyze that. And I think that, that would be a great thing. I know resumes can be very individualized. It would be a great thing to kind of set up a one-on-one session and go into in more detail, so I could better understand where the gaps are. But in most cases, I mean, especially if you have been working for the last few years, you know, if you have gaps further back, it's really not as big of an issue.
Great. We've had a couple questions, and I see Marcy's already answered it, but people are asking, you know, what's best practices on links of resumes and cover letters. Even someone earlier on asked what's the best font to use. So, you know, are there any steadfast rules that are important to stick to? You know, even margins or spacing, or those types of things that you both would recommend?
I mean, I think, you know, my general rule is still 1 page for every 10 years. So once you go over 10 years, if you have 20 years of experience, you know, it's perfectly reasonable to have a 2-page resume. I would not go beyond that unless you're in academia, and, you know, asked to submit a CV, at which point it can get exceedingly long. But if you are looking at something in the corporate world, you know, ideally a page, and then 2 if you're over 10 years. You know, one thing I tell people to keep in mind, and this is the tagline that I use for my business, is the resume should be geared to the job that you want and not all the jobs that you've had. So I don't need to know everything you've ever done. I need to know what you've done that is relevant to what I want you to do, right? So, and that helps sometimes to gut check, you know, whether you necessarily have to keep all that content on. Also, to that point, and I think in that first sample that we pulled up, I get sometimes wanting to pull up experience further back. Sometimes that is because, you know, you want to go back to something that you were doing before, or perhaps, you know, you just have, there's a couple brand name companies that, you know, you started with Deloitte, and there is a certain, you know, respect that comes with that. But employers typically care about the last 10 years. So if you're going further back, what you can do, and Jack, if you could pull that sample up,
Yeah.
again, that would be awesome, is just, you know, list your roles, and with detailed bullets under your experience over the last 10 years. And then,
Which one?
Yes. So like you can have at the bottom, you know, additional roles include, and you can just list those out with or without the dates. But you don't necessarily have to put a lot of bullets under things that are way further back, because the chances of somebody asking you about your, you know, first job in 1997 are slim to none.
Great. So Liz asked, are hyperlinks to publications or organizations I worked for, volunteered for helpful? And I guess to kind of branch that to a further question, you know, I've seen people who have online resumes, or like Liz was saying, you know, links in their resumes. To what extent is that helpful or encouraged now, or do you kind of recommend more the just kind of standard resume is still best?
Mm-hmm. So I think that links to publications are great, especially if they're relevant to the job, right? So you're showing expertise on a topic area. I would say, you know, links to organizations that you've volunteered with, unless you are linking them to, you know, a specific project that you've done that, again, showcases a skill set that would be relevant. I would probably not link. Definitely a link to your LinkedIn profile, as that is, you know, part of this process these days. Definitely, if you are a graphic designer, or, you know, somebody in marketing or communications, where you are often asked for samples, a link to a personal website where those samples live. Or if you are if you have a blog about a certain topic that is relevant, certainly you could link there. But I would say not just throwing links in to throw links in.
Hey, Jack,
Yeah.
do you mind if I jump in and give a little maybe voice to Robin's question in the chat box?
Yes. Yep. Would you mind just reading it
So,
for everyone?
Robin, yes, it says, what is the take on the specific job titles in the resume? As a long-term employee at a company, what if your job title did not represent what you actually did by the job descriptions that are out there today? I'll say our company is like that. You know, Jack's job title does not represent nearly all of the things that he does, and neither does mine, and we don't change them, and there's no interest internally in changing them. And I think that's the beauty of the resume is, to Katherine's point, some resumes you can focus on what you've accomplished, but I think particularly if you've been somewhere long term, you could use years to identify sort of how your portfolio, if it's not as easy to quantify goals, I accomplished this or we met this quota. What you could use is years. I worked at the General Alumni Association, and from 95 to 97, here was my portfolio of work or my responsibilities. And then 97 to 99, here are the things I worked on. So you can show growth and achievement and portfolio in other ways, even if you cannot, if the job title doesn't show it, or if it's hard to sort of, it's less measurable than other fields. There are definitely ways to still highlight that you were changing and growing and doing things beyond what your job title actually says.
That's a great point. And that's also, sometimes I think on the flip side, job titles can be intimidating. So let's say you were in communications at a bank, everyone in a bank is a vice president. But if you're going to go, once you've been there like 2 or 3 years, everybody's a VP. But then if you want to move into another organization where you wouldn't have that VP title, that can be intimidating to employers. So it's really more about the content, to Marcy's point, and kind of leading with the things that are most relevant to the organization.
Great. So we have had a couple more questions about how to address gaps in resume, whether that's taking time to spend time with your family, or just for whatever reason. And I know we referred to earlier on kind of maybe addressing that in the cover letter. Is there anything kind of specific you would recommend on the resume to address those gaps?
I think anything that you were doing that was not necessarily paid is still relevant, right? So thinking about bringing up, volunteer experiences. If you are leading the fundraising efforts for, the annual festival and raised the most money in the history of the school, that's relevant, right? If you were overhauling the PTA website, that's relevant. If you were the treasurer for the PTA, that's relevant. If you were a board member on a nonprofit, that's relevant. There are things that we can pull up to show that you are still leveraging, your professional skill set. It doesn't matter if it was paid or not. The other thing to consider, depending on how long you have been out of work and whether or not there might be additional training that needs to happen, would be to start taking some courses on things like, it depends on what you're going into, but Excel or SEO, search engine optimization, or Adobe PowerPoint. There's things that you can do to show that you're working towards coming back into the paid workforce. The other option too is to potentially, if you're starting to think about this, maybe doing some project work for a friend. So I was just talking to somebody yesterday, in HR, took time off, is wanting to get back in, and we were talking about it, and she said, well, here's kind of what I'm thinking about doing. And we ended up realizing that she had a friend who had a business that needed some policies put in place. So she is offering to write that employee manual for them, right? At a reduced rate or just pro bono to get some more recent experience on the resume. But ultimately, again, I think people are willing to overlook a gap in employment. We live in an economy where businesses open, close, are acquired. Women stay home to take care of the kids. Men stay home to take care of the kids. We have aging parents we have to help. There's a lot of reasons. It's showing that you're being thoughtful about reentry. I will say, to Marcy's point about being specific and strategic in your search, that's going to be a big part of it, especially if your gap is, larger. Let's say you've been out 5 or 10 years, then it's going to be really purposeful about what is it that I think I want to do, and what companies are in need of that skill set, and let me go out and start to reconnect and reignite my network of people that I used to work with, family, friends, UNC graduates, leveraging that connection. When you're looking at making a transition, your network becomes even more important in the job search. So the resume, should be pulled together and should highlight what you bring to the table. Again, that select accomplishments or relevant experience, pulling that up. So the first thing they see isn't the gap, but your network and, proactive outreach is probably going to be, how that next opportunity comes about.
And Marcy, just to kind of add on to that. Oh, sorry, it sounded like you're about to say something.
I was.
Just as briefly, in your experience as a hiring manager, what are some good examples that you've seen of people addressing that gap?
Yep. So I was just I'll make it really quick, and hopefully, Craig, to Katherine's point, family business is the same way. In order to run a family business, there are lots of things that have to be done, whether it was volunteer or paid. Focus on the things that you accomplished to keep the family business going. It's no different than working at a Deloitte or anywhere else. So, family business, put it on your resume and talk about what you did. In terms of gaps, and we got one question in advance, which was about, how do I convince an employer that I'm overqualified for a position? I look at those in the same way, and the honest answer is you won't, right? And that's a hard answer for some people to hear. But the good news is that if you're the right person for the job, it won't matter. I've hired gaps, I've seen gaps. I'm not deterred by the gap in of itself. I am looking at what has this person done that's going to make them an asset, and are they a good fit for where we're trying to go? So some folks, if you're the right fit and you're overqualified, they're going to be ecstatic because they're like, I'm getting a steal of a deal, somebody who has all this experience that they can really self-direct and move this project forward. And we really wish we could hire a more experienced professional, but we don't have the budget to do so, A, B, and C. So I think when the match is right, none of these things will matter at all. The gap won't matter. The time the gap won't matter. Whether you're overqualified, it won't matter. But again, it's about really being able to know that it's a good fit for you and a good fit for them. And I think the research, the networking, all those things help to bring that into focus so that an employer has more confidence. Even in the reference tracking process, if you get that far, making sure you choose really good references who will talk about the skills and you as a person, the soft and hard skills that will make you a really great candidate and fit for whatever the position is that you have applied.
Awesome.
Thank you. And Marcy, to that point with overqualified, the one thing from a resume standpoint I would keep in mind is that, if you have 20 years of experience, but the job is asking for 5, then I wouldn't lead with, I have 20 plus years of experience doing X, Y, Z, because they're going to look at that. We want to lead with the things that are most relevant to that specific position. I'd also think about length. Again, if it's 5 to 10 years of experience, I would probably get your resume down to a page. If it's, if they're looking for a more senior person, then 2 pages is fine. But you just want to be very cognizant of how that first impression is coming across to that employer.
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions who are asking about kind of these online application systems. I know in higher ed we use them quite a bit, and specifically Keith is asking, I'm finding jobs that require, oh, and it disappeared on me, to fill out applications where they ask for every job you've worked and say, do not just refer to resume, don't just say like refer to resume, and how would you recommend filling those out? And then Rachel asks a similar question, when they ask for very specific information, day, month, start date, end dates for jobs, she might have had a long time ago. How would you recommend filling that out if you don't necessarily have all that information?
Right. Yeah, and I'm guessing, that's mainly, I would say, like state and federal government jobs ask for a lot more information than corporate does typically. So yeah, they're asking for everything but your firstborn child in that application. And unfortunately, you have to fill it all out in order to get through. I think in terms of start dates, if you can put a month, I don't necessarily think, if you're a little bit off, that's fine. But especially if you're going back, 10, 12, 15 years, who the heck knows? In my first job, wasn't, pretty sure I filled out a paper application, and I don't know that I would have, I don't have that email anymore, like confirming the offer. So I have no idea. So you really just kind of have to, if you can put a month and a year, and then, yeah, a lot of times it's repetitive. It's like copying and pasting from the resume in terms of, specific accomplishments within the role. Also within state, and federal, they often ask for general job descriptions. So certainly, in those cases, you have to put in what they're asking for, unfortunately, to get through the scan. But I would just say do the best you can. And then it, comes to Marcy's point, references are going to be incredibly important. In most cases, when they're verifying, it's, they call a company and yes, he worked from the state to the state. That's, as long as that lines up, you're fine.
And specifically when you look at those application systems, is it okay to literally just copy and paste your job description from your resume into those? Is that kind of just another way that they're scanning those?
Yeah, and it just depends on the system. And I will say this, read the directions and just make sure that you're providing the information they are looking for. I see this a lot of times. People, will email me and say, I can't get this to upload. And it's, it's because they're uploading a PDF and it says they want a Word doc, or vice versa, right? So if they're asking for a general job description, certainly put that in. That will probably have some of the keywords, and then reiterate that under other sections in terms, if they're asking for, major accomplishments within those roles.
So we've had a couple questions sent in and then in the chat, how to address relocation in your resume and cover letter, specifically if you're looking to, you live in one area of the country, you're looking to move to another. Is that something that's worth mentioning on a resume?
I don't know that I would put it on a resume. I would take your, and again, I don't need your address anymore. Nobody mails anything. If you are in the city for which you're applying, so I'm in Raleigh, if I'm applying to a job in Raleigh, I'm going to put Raleigh, North Carolina on there, along with my email. If you're not in the geography, I would just not include it and just have your email and phone. Ultimately, when they look at the company and the location, they're going to know that you're not in that geography. I think the cover letter is the right place to address that. Be very clear about when you can be there. If it really just depends on your individual situation. But yes, I think in the cover letter is the best place to do that. I will also say, not to beat a dead horse, but when you are looking at transitioning, whether that's industry, function, or geography, the proactive outreach is going to be important, whether that is, reaching out to other, Tar Heels in California or New York or DC or wherever it is you want to go, or following up on postings via LinkedIn, trying to find a recruiter that you can follow up with, really doing some digging to show that this is a purposeful move on your part. You may get scanned out when they realize, that you're not in that location currently.
And Marcy, I know someone on our team recently moved from Pennsylvania area. How is that addressed in kind of in the interview and resume process?
Honestly, I tend not to talk to people about that until either they need to do an in-person interview or until it's time to make an offer. It kind of can come up tangentially in conversation throughout. When you're interviewing, a question might be a great opening for you to say, yes, well, my fiance or my this is, in this area. And so, the question might be, why are you interested in this job at this time? And it's the perfect segue to say, well, my fiance lives in Raleigh and I live in DC and I'm looking to get into the Raleigh area, X, Y, Z. That's just one example of the many reasons that people might be moving, and it answers the question without necessarily it being weirdly have to be asked. So, sometimes you can find a wonderful way to volunteer the answer for why you're changing a region or industry or geography without it ever being an awkward moment between you and or the employer. And then, so that was part of it. This person was looking to come back home and be closer to family, and it just came out sort of in the process. I think the real question, which Katherine would always say, you don't talk about until you get a job offer, is who pays for the relocation expenses, right? So, that's the real question on the floor is, am I responsible when I'm trying to move, or is the company? And you don't need to talk about that until they decide they want you, and then that becomes a place of discussion or negotiation. It's not something that you should bring up as an applicant at any point in time, particularly if you're already thinking about a move. Hopefully, if you're already thinking about a move, you're already thinking about you might have to cover your moving expenses yourself.
Great. I want to be mindful of time. We got about 10 minutes left, and I'm just going to share a couple of points just to wrap up and then give people some more time to put any other questions in chat that they would like. Just want to mention that many of you may have seen that we have opened up a lot of our alumni career resources to all alumni that maybe previously would have been reserved for just GAA members. One of which is this, the Tar Heel Advising Network, which is an online networking platform for alumni to connect with each other. We also have a job board that is only accessible to UNC alumni on there. And just really a good experience, or a good platform to connect with people who want to help and who are Tar Heels and want to help Tar Heels. So it's, a little bit different than your LinkedIn page of, LinkedIn has lots of different purposes. And maybe if you reach out to someone, they might not be interested in helping. Everybody who's on here has volunteered to help. So that is something that, again, I'll send out afterwards, or you can just search Tar Advising Network. Some of the other resources that we've opened up are the virtual career coffee chats, which you're on right now. We're going to be having more of these over the next few months. We have our webinar library that has previous chats like this, and then our career resource articles. We also want to mention that if you are a GA member, or if you are interested in becoming one, as a benefit to your membership, you get one session with Katherine every year, and for an extended time, we're offering additional sessions. Definitely understand this is a hard time for a lot of people and job seekings who want to make sure you're as supported as possible. Let me see if we had any other questions.
I'll add something based on one of the questions, which is in the webinar library. Katherine has done a webinar on updating your LinkedIn profile. So I've seen a few questions about that. It's a whole webinar on how to really nail it with your LinkedIn profile.
Yes, yeah, and we are going to be doing one in 2 weeks on networking from home. So I'm sure we'll talk about LinkedIn and Tar Advising Network in there as well.
And I will say, LinkedIn over time has evolved, and starting out, it was, in many ways a data dump of your resume into the system. I think it has evolved to become more of a social media platform, still professional, but with that, LinkedIn profiles have become a way to tell your story in a way that they weren't previously, right? So we still need to have the keywords and maximize usage, and we walk through that in that webinar. But it's a great place for you to talk about wanting to move. It's a great place to talk about what motivates you. What I've found is that I enjoy, this most. I like project management. Maybe you are a VP, but you want to go back and do something different. You're able to, it's more of a cover letter than it was. So, certainly, watch that webinar, make sure you're maximizing the keywords, maximizing your presence, but also think about, ways to use it to tell your story in a way that you can't do on a traditional resume.
Great, yeah, definitely. Again, all of those are open to all alumni, so you can go back and look at all the great information. I think we've actually done one on resumes too. So if you'd like to get a little bit more information, definitely check that out. We have a question from Sherry on how do companies feel about longevity at one company? Hiring companies feel longevity at one company. For example, she's been with one company for 18 years, but how do you talk about growth in different areas of business?
Yeah, no, I think that's, that can be, it's not a bad thing, right? It shows loyalty to an organization, especially at a time where we've got people, and job hopping has kind of slowed down. But I think it's good. What we need to do is make sure we're showing growth. So, as Marcy said, kind of talking about what you did, early on, and then here's where my focus was, for the next 5 years, really making sure that you are showing that you were growing and learning within different roles or different projects. I wouldn't overanalyze that as a bad thing. I think it's a good thing.
Great. Let me see if we have any other questions here. Robin asked, should you ask continuous learning courses on your resume? For example, technology courses, because you've seen that in job description.
Yes. Yeah, you can put that in the education section. Obviously, I need to know your formal degree first. And then, you can then list courses that you've taken that are relevant to the job.
Awesome. Well, we got a couple more minutes if anyone has any kind of last final questions. But again, want to say thank you to Katherine and Marcy for being here today and helping out, and hopefully everyone got some good information. I will be following up with a survey, the resume decks that got sent out, or that we talked about earlier, and then just some other follow-up information that we talked about on this call.
And I am happy to talk with anybody
Yes.
about your individual resume. If you want to schedule a coaching session, we can certainly do that. I know everybody has nuances in their background and specific questions that may or may not be ones they want to ask in this platform. So we'd be happy to talk to you later.
Yes, definitely. Yes, I will drop the link in for career coaching. Essentially, you can just send me an email, Jack_Ahern, and I can point you in the right direction. But I'll get you the link right now as well. All right. Well, I think that about does it. Not seeing any other questions in the chat. So again, thank you everyone for being here today, and hope to see you again soon on one of these.